Hello, my name is Christi Scarrow. Welcome to Messy Leadership Podcast, where we talk about the hard stuff in managing people. I'm really excited to welcome Stacey Kravitz. She is the president of UNFI Canada. Thank you so much for being here, Stacey.
Oh, thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me, Christi.
Great. Well, and so I always love to start by understanding, as we go through our careers, I think we learn a lot. And what are some of the lessons, or what's the most important lesson that you've learned throughout your career that shaped you as a leader today?
I always say that feedback is a gift. I know that sounds odd as a leadership principle, but that was probably my biggest learning midway through my career. So I think when you start out in your career, you take feedback very defensively. And I think that's just a natural trait in most people, especially most people who want to do well and want to succeed. And I was one of those people who wanted to succeed, wanted to be a leader, and, wanted to rush my career, had a ton of ambition. And at one point, you realize there's a hill you need to climb to become a leader, and you need to be open and willing to accept feedback on what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, and accept those development opportunities. And usually, it takes folks time to connect to that. You know what I mean? And really understand it. So I think it's a level of professional maturity. It's a level of willingness and want to get to where you need to get to be able to listen holistically to that feedback and have the courage to make change. So that's one of, I think that was the pivotal moment in my career where, the trajectory changed for me, and I actually started to grow, learn, develop, and, become the leader that I am today. So I think feedback is one that I would say is a big lesson for me.
So this is off top of my head, but I would love if you've got a thought of some feedback that you have received that
Hmm.
really helped you kind of feel like, okay, this is actually a benefit. Like, I'm glad I listened to this.
Yeah. So it was this pivotal moment. It's a story I probably tell every future leader that I get a chance to talk to. It was midway through my career where I would say that I was still a senior manager, and I was, everyone around me was getting promoted to director, and I really couldn't figure out, why I had not become a director. And at this point in time, I was offered a position. I was a salesperson through and through. I had grown up in the sales organization, calling on customers, and I loved my job. I absolutely loved it. And this was when I was at Kraft. And I was asked to be a senior manager of sales strategy. Not something I was super excited about, very individual contributor type role, and very alone role, and I was used to working in teams and being with the customer, and, I'm a very extroverted person. So it was a very different role. And I think in hindsight, I could have grabbed my arms around that role a little bit differently than I did. The company at the time had promised me a director position post that role, kind of saying this would be a stepping stone. But because I didn't take that role with my arms wrapped around it, I think two things happened. One, I didn't behave like a leader in accepting that role, learning, developing, and trying to grow and get something out of that role. So to demonstrate to folks why, this would be important, and that could be successful at it. And I was versatile as a future leader of the organization. And I just kind of went through the motions of doing the role. And, I didn't really have a manager that, I admired or I felt had great leadership qualities. So that didn't help matters. So, but those were all excuses at the end of the day. And so when a big reorg happened and I got a job that I had two jobs prior, so a repeat job, I was like, what the heck happened? How did this happen? And oblivious to the fact that I had not performed well and I had not been given feedback. So lesson for me today. And then I decided, I was so upset. I was beside myself. I've told this story a million times. And so much so that I decided, after I composed myself, like, I'm going to go talk to, boss's boss. I got to find out from like senior leaders, what is it that I'm missing? And he hit me right between the eyes when I met with him. And he basically said, Stacey, you know what? You're high maintenance. We sit in a room and we try to figure out where we're going to put you and what's your reaction going to be. And it was very, very much an eye-opening experience to get that feedback. It was straight to the point. It hurt. It was really upsetting because it's not like I was doing poor work. I was doing good work, but I could have probably been doing great work and doing it quietly in a way that got recognized differently than it did. And he gave me that feedback. And of course, because of the ambition that I had and the want to become a leader, I was like, you know what? That's fine. I'm gonna kill this next job that I get into. So that's why I say feedback is a gift. Get it straight between the eyes, ask for it. And, that's the experience that I think really changed how I lead today. I would never not provide the feedback necessary to someone who's aspiring to do something.
Yeah, so many amazing insights in that. One is, go after the opportunities in front of you, even if they don't feel like the right opportunity. And as you
Absolutely.
said, ask the questions along the way, like what's happening, what's going well, because that sometimes you're right. It's a hesitancy, especially I find for newer leaders, because they're trying to prove themselves. So they
Hmm.
don't want to say, I don't know what I'm doing, or am I doing okay? It's really scary. So
So true.
and even that idea of being hit between the eyes, I think that is important in feedback. As you said, it's not, sometimes it hurts. I often say, I agree with your sentiment. Feedback's a gift. Sometimes it's a gift you don't feel like you want to get, or you want to repackage to give it to somebody else. But it's,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
but it's so good. So no, I love everything you said there. And it kind of leads me to my next question around, in the leadership role you're in now, obviously leading a number of people and a whole organization. What are some of the things that are still challenging, that are kind of messy, and you're like, and what helps you overcome them?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the gap that exists in the leaders today of organizations and the lower levels of the organization, and really taking this philosophy around feedback and career ambition and the things that you need to do to develop yourself in a career. It's that gap of knowledge and training and education and mentoring maybe that happens at the lower levels, and it's different as it is today. As it was, sorry, I should say, back in our day. You know what I mean? So you can provide that feedback, but the generation that's growing up in the organization may not be as attuned to it, or appreciate it as much. So it's you need to lead differently than you did today in the past, right? And so there's a whole hodgepodge of leaders out there that are kind of at different levels, and it's how do you educate them in the new norm that is today versus 20 years ago, if you get where I'm going. And so you need to keep up to speed as a leader, you need to keep up to speed as to what's going on in your total organization, not just your direct staff, so that you can help direct your leaders and then, below. And we've really noticed it, particularly at UNFI, as we kind of were a company that came together, with a lot of folks that have been around a long time, and then a lot of newer folks, and then COVID happened, and you kind of your turnover happens some more. You move to a different way of working, and so I just think culturally, it's going with the times and managing, keeping some of the old stuff that you've learned, and taking that with you, but bringing it to folks in a different way. And that resonates more with them. But the principles in my mind all hold the same. So how you provide feedback might be different today than it was, when I got it 15 years ago. But today, what would you do differently? And so I think for me, it's about the generation differences in the professional workplace today that are hard for leaders to navigate.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that conundrum is those individuals who are the younger generation are probably struggling the same way you did, which is saying, "Why do I have to
Mm,
ask for feedback? Why is feedback important?" But at least we have the ability, I think, to reinforce that, which probably didn't happen when we were young leaders, where
absolutely.
no one was saying, "Ask for feedback, ask for feedback." And I think we recognize it now, but it's still it's still hard, I think, from a practice standpoint, and not all organizations get it right either in terms of
No.
feedback.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that's one challenge. The other challenge I find leaders, and I think it's an important point to bring up, is this whole work life is different than it was pre-COVID. And I see a lot of leaders struggling with this. And it's an important conundrum. You know, I use the word too, Christi, sorry. Um, but it's an important thing to look at is this not being in the office as much anymore. And look, we're a work from home now organization. No one has to be in the office, inclusive of myself. I go, we go, but it's ad hoc, and it's not, hybrid. It's not anything. It's 100% work from home, North America, by the way. And there's a missing piece. You don't get to see your future leaders in action as often as you'd like. And so and that's another generational gap, right? Because you've got these folks that have kind of grown up now or getting their first jobs that happened pre-COVID, then COVID, and then now they've gotten this taste of working from home. And hey, by the way, I love working from home. I'm more productive, I have less travel time, all the rest of it. And but there is a missing piece of really having that elevator conversation, president to supervisor, like that you don't see on a day in day out basis, and you don't get to witness that leader as much anymore, and they don't realize what they're missing. The younger generation coming up within the organization, and so I think that's a miss somehow that we need to figure out. And I see leaders grappling with that a lot.
That's definitely a hard one, and that's a great insight because I often think about, you can't build trust as well in hybrid. You don't get to build the teams as well. But you're
Mm,
right, you don't even get to reinforce those reinforcement moments where just simply you've just seen somebody act in a certain way that you may not have been present for because it's not on a
exactly.
Teams or a Zooms call, right? It's just you see it kind of under the corner of your eye, and the culture that you kind of come across in an office environment is definitely different. So yeah, I don't know how to figure that one out, but I think if we do, we can maybe sell it, package it, make a lot of money. But yeah, that's a hard one.
You're probably right.
That's a definite hard one. I've heard for a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders. So I know you've already given me some great ideas and the listeners some great advice. But anything else you can think of, that are people managers who are struggling with it, they're trying to manage, they're trying to influence things that they need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think I think the other thing that you need to be a little bit more open to doing is learning yourself and taking what you're learning in the, modern day self-help, wellness space, like what's going on there. I'm reading a really interesting book by Robin Sharma. I think it's his new book. I don't have it in front. I wish I brought it in front of me, to be honest. Like I don't have it because I'm reading it. It's by my bedside. It's a really interesting book. It's all about life and wealth. How do you get wealth in your life? Anyways, I'm sure you'll look it up and maybe
Yeah.
mention. But
I can put it in the show notes for the listeners.
yes,
Perfect.
thank
Yeah,
you,
yeah, we'll
thank
do
you.
that.
Okay,
We'll do that.
it's I think it's his latest book, and it's a book, and it's got 8 different sections in it to build wealth in your life. And those 8 different sections are, anything from, your craft, he calls it, which is your work, which was a really interesting chapter. And what he does is he writes 2 pages in each of these sections that is like it's a mentoring moment. So he's mentoring you with little tidbits of advice throughout this like 400-page book. So every night I go to bed and I read a couple of these mentoring sessions, and there's always an aha. And it's an aha about myself, and it's an aha about the people I lead. And I'm often sending, a couple of chapters here and there to folks that I know, to say, hey, did you like, one chapter I just read last night was about forgiveness, how loving your enemy is important. Like, always forgive, because the carrying the anger is harder for you than it is for everything. So I don't mean to get too philosophical here, but the reading that I'm doing, helps me lead better. And so I think training isn't the same type of training as you had in the past, was the point I wanted to make. And oftentimes I get questions in interviews about training programs and all these kind of things. And I think training in life is more important and there's so much literature out there that has that information. And, I don't know that any company prescribes to this per se, but I think if you incorporate those learnings into every day with your teams, that those mean more than actual training, because they're like aha moments. And so I often recommend, like, I have a newsletter that goes out every 2 months online, and people have said make it a video, but I really like to have something written that has purpose and meaning, and then recommend a book at the end. And it's like, what am I reading, what am I planning to read, and why? And I encourage folks to look up certain things and explain what you can learn from those, and they really help you in your day in, day out leadership journey, whatever that might be. So,
Yeah, and so much from that what I heard was this idea of self-awareness, which has to happen through ongoing learning and this desire to seek information. But what I also thought was really interesting is you said you're learning for yourself, but for your team. So it's just you're
mm,
learning how to be a better leader, but there's things like, oh, maybe that's why that person behaves in that way, or this could help them, because that's really powerful and I think important, and something we don't necessarily think about in all that sort of self-awareness. And your concept of training is totally true. It's interesting for me. I deliver training, but I'll
yes.
have people call up and say, like, I want to create this culture of feedback. Can we do that in 3 90-minute sessions? Like, no,
No.
you can, I can give you some training on how to deliver feedback, but there's got to be much more around that. There's got to be ongoing support and reinforcement and mentoring and coaching. And so I think you're right. I think that it's much more holistic than maybe it was. And I think people recognizing the need to invest in themselves. And
Yeah.
what I do
I
love is
think
this generation is better at
facilitating.
wellness. Yeah.
It's so true, but Christy, like, what you do on this, like, in your day work is really important from a facilitation standpoint. It's working with leaders like myself to, really develop what you need. And so what I would say is your world is even changing, to your point. Your world is changing, is like, how do we train? Well, it's really around, we can build based on what you tell us you're looking for to build, but that's going to take time, right? So I think it's an interesting realm, because me, I love to learn, period. And I love when someone can help me facilitate and bring it all together. So and that's something we've done before together, and I quite enjoy it, but it's changing. It's definitely changing.
Totally. And I didn't mean to talk over you, but I was reflecting on the fact that at least I appreciate that this new generation supports wellness so much, again, more than we did, right? It's
Yes.
this
Oh
an
my
idea of
God.
wealth being more than just making money. It's about, who they are more holistically as a person. So I think that's
Yeah.
really important.
No, it's good.
Well, good. Well, this has been a great conversation. And as you know, I'm trying to keep it fairly short and sweet for the
Yes.
listeners. So I really want to thank you, because so many great insights that you've shared and talked about through your journey. For my listeners, if you're looking for ways to navigate the messy bits of leadership in your life, there's going to be some great helpful resources in the show notes. And you can find me at christyscarrow.com. Thank you very much, Stacey. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.